The woman was truly astounded. She could never have imagined that the man she secretly admired had transformed into the appearance of a ghoul. As a scholar specializing in monster research, she had never encountered the legendary dragon. The idea that the protagonist could be swallowed by a dragon and then turn into an undead was beyond bizarre. Yet, she was certain that the person before her was indeed the protagonist. Learning that he still wished to continue as an adventurer, Roland didn't hesitate to offer her help. Given his current appearance, he was no longer suitable for staying at inns, so she let him stay at her house. In exchange, she would take some of his bodily samples for research. She claimed this was her intention, but in reality, she also sought a way to turn him back into a human. The next day, Roland returned from the Adventurers Guild, having exchanged the protagonist's loot for gold coins. With money in hand, the protagonist immediately headed to the weapon shop. As his weapon had been damaged in previous battles, the weapon shop owner was taken aback upon seeing him. Despite being fully cloaked, there was something familiar about him. After inspecting his weapon, she quickly realized that the man could use magic, holy energy, and chi. They had only ever had one customer like that before, the protagonist when he was human. Crafting a weapon that accommodated all three attributes would take time, and her husband, the craftsman, was very particular. He would need to consult with the protagonist several times during the process. The protagonist assured her it was no issue and that she could contact Scholar Roland for communication. When the shop owner heard this, she suspected something. Meanwhile, Roland was engrossed in her monster research. Although the protagonist had managed to existentially evolve from a skeleton to a ghoul, true monsters capable of evolution were incredibly rare. The protagonist's current state was exceptionally unique. Despite his transformation, Roland was immediately sure it was him upon their first encounter. They had known each other for nearly 10 years. Having met on a mission when they were younger, the protagonist's extensive knowledge of adventuring had captivated her. Since then, he had strived to become a God Silver level adventurer while she pursued her research, always keeping an eye on his progress. On the other side, the protagonist had already made a contract with the weapon shop owner. Until the new weapon was forged, they provided him with a spare weapon that allowed him to temporarily use chi and magic. After settling everything, the protagonist hurriedly left, leaving them pondering his departure. The shop owner couldn't understand why he wouldn't rely on them, especially since they had already figured out his identity. Her husband thought the protagonist was cursed and hid his identity to avoid involving them, but by leaving Roland's contact information, he hinted at his true identity. By evening, the protagonist had prepared dinner for Roland, reviving their old routine. During his human days, he would take care of all household chores in exchange for learning various knowledge from Roland. She asked about his goals, and he expressed his desire to keep evolving until he could live a normal life with a human appearance. The next day, the protagonist went to the Watermoon Labyrinth to grind monsters. There, he encountered a middle-aged man who was clearly a novice. The kind-hearted protagonist couldn't stand by and help defeat a slime. However, he didn't explain much and left. The labyrinth's monsters were dangerous, but there were also humans who pretended to be weak to ambush and rob others. The man caught up with the protagonist, revealing he was just an ordinary chef facing financial troubles. He needed to gather 15 gold coins within a week, prompting his risky venture into the labyrinth. The protagonist didn't want to meddle, but then remembered the hidden area where he encountered the dragon. Since he was no longer suited for the guild, he needed someone to help map the area and report it to the guild. So, he asked the man to follow him. To the latter's delight, observing the man's wounds, the protagonist felt an instinctive craving for flesh, unaware that this was a sign of his impending existential evolution. Afterward, he took the man to explore the space where the dragon had been. There, the man discovered a narrow passage that the protagonist had never explored. At the end, they found an empty room. As the protagonist entered, he saw a red teleportation circle light up on the floor, invisible to the man. Stepping into it, they were transported to an unknown area, likely a deeper layer with powerful monsters. Despite the danger, the protagonist couldn't abandon the man and stepped into the teleportation circle without hesitation, only to find the man already downed upon arrival. The woman was truly exasperated. The man she had secretly loved for years suddenly embraced her. She thought this straightforward man had finally seen the light. However, she never expected him to truly unleash his beastly nature. It turned out that the protagonist could no longer suppress his ghoul instincts. When he lost control and saw Lorraine for the first time, all he could think about was how delicious she must be. The cause of all this was the protagonist's latest evolution, which made him unable to control his desire to devour flesh and blood. Not long ago, the protagonist encountered a bone giant in the Watermoon Labyrinth. To protect the unconscious chef uncle, he faced this terrifying entity alone. This encounter would soon become the catalyst for his evolution. From his ineffective initial attack, The protagonist deduced that she had no effect on the bone giant. He then attempted to use magic to attack, but to no avail. With the exit's teleportation circle gone, the bone giant was clearly the boss of this room, and it seemed impossible to leave without defeating it. What made matters worse was his need to protect the chef uncle during the fight. Yet, he persisted, embodying the spirit of an adventurer, a lesson taught by someone he admired. In the next moment, he unleashed Holy Energy, a force too great for his backup weapon to handle. As expected, Holy Energy inflicted damage on the undead, breaking the bone giant's leg. Seizing the opportunity, the protagonist delivered the final blow. When the chef uncle awoke, he found the protagonist healing himself with holy energy. Before the protagonist could explain, the uncle was shocked by the sight of the shattered remains of the bone giant. Then, he saw the protagonist extracting a massive magic stone. Just one look at the stone size made the uncle realize how powerful the bone giant had been. Even more astonishing was the protagonist's offer to give him the magic stone, asking only for help with errands at the guild and lifetime free meals at the restaurant in return. Such simple conditions were readily accepted by the uncle, who was actually helping himself. Tears fell from the uncle's eyes as he thought of this. Upon returning to town, the uncle explained everything to his wife, introducing the protagonist as his savior. The couple expressed their heartfelt thanks to the protagonist, welcoming him for meals anytime. Unbeknownst to them, their actions had saved the protagonist's life. After defeating the bone giant, his thoughts began to slip out of control, his subconscious increasingly craving flesh and blood. If the uncle had been deceitful, the protagonist's last shred of sanity would have completely unraveled. His consciousness blurring, the protagonist returned to Lorraine's cottage.
Lento, 一体何を？なんだ、レント。レント、お前。
Coming to his senses, Lorraine kicked him away and tried calling his name, hoping to awaken his consciousness. Fortunately, the protagonist regained some awareness and stopped. Seeing this, Lorraine decided to knock him down. When the protagonist regained consciousness again, he was puzzled about his presence in the cottage. Seeing Lorraine, he immediately remembered what had happened and apologized. Lorraine was more concerned about what the protagonist had gone through than his apology. After explaining everything, the protagonist offered to check her wounds. Seeing that Lorraine's injuries were only superficially treated, he felt even more guilty and hurriedly used holy energy to heal her. Noticing more bite marks on her shoulder, he activated holy energy again. Lorraine then noticed something and asked him to remove his shirt, revealing his now stronger body. Unbeknownst to him, he had evolved again. When he tried to see if his face had changed, he found his mask shape completely altered, worrying about exposing his identity. However, the mask changed again, adapting to his wishes. Lorraine speculated that they might be able to remove the mask, but they couldn't. The protagonist needed to cover his face anyway, so it wasn't a significant issue. Lorraine also noticed that the protagonist's speech had become much smoother, possibly another effect of his evolution. But unlike previous evolutions, which were instantaneous, this one was delayed. Lorraine guessed that consuming her flesh and blood might have met a condition necessary for evolution, turning him into a ghoul, a type of vampire. The protagonist didn't understand why he became a ghoul, but Lorraine suggested that monsters might evolve in the direction they desire. Since the protagonist wished to return to a human form, she believed he could potentially evolve into a vampire, but this evolution might require meeting specific conditions beyond defeating monsters. The next day, the protagonist looked at his damaged backup weapon, anticipating the weapon shop owner's complaints. He explained his encounter with the bone giant in an undiscovered area. The owner had already recognized the protagonist's true identity, but they never openly discussed it. The owner then provided a better backup weapon, and the protagonist set off for the labyrinth again. The woman was truly at her wit's end. The first time she cooked, she prepared a bowl of poison for the man she had secretly loved for years. Yet, knowing full well it was poison, the man drank it without hesitation. This was because his body had transformed into that of a monster. Ever since the protagonist evolved into a ghoul, indeed, poisons had no effect on him. However, for some reason, healing potions and elixirs still worked on him. Moreover, the ghoul's body didn't require sleep. The only thing that troubled the protagonist was the occasional hunger he felt, a craving for flesh he deeply loathed. While the protagonist was pondering, Lorraine handed him a small bottle. His first thought was that it was poison again. Unexpectedly, It was blood that Lorraine had prepared especially for him. Knowing his strong aversion to flesh, this small bottle was all he needed to suppress his hunger. Next, the protagonist planned to head to the guild since taking on commissions was the only way to advance. Hearing this, Lorraine disagreed with his plan, pointing out that presenting an adventurer's license would surely cause a commotion. Given his former influence, this left the protagonist puzzled, wondering how a bronze-level adventurer like himself could wield any influence. Seeing his naive appearance, Lorraine sighed and explained that although he was just a bronze-level adventurer, his contributions over the past 10 years were significant, from assisting newcomers to handling troublesome commissions. The Adventurers Guild had taken note. They had even considered inviting him to work at the guild, but seeing no signs of him wanting to retire, they never broached the subject. However, upon learning this, the protagonist had no intention of retiring, as his dream was to become a mithril-level adventurer. After some thought, Lorraine suggested that the protagonist rejoin the guild under a new identity. He agreed to this approach and thus arrived at the Adventurers Guild. What he didn't expect was that shortly after rejoining the guild, he would encounter someone with the strength of a dragon. Before this, he registered with an old acquaintance, Shella. Feeling nostalgic as the last time he filled out a registration form was 10 years ago. After so many experiences, he was starting anew. Shella was shocked upon reading the form. The protagonist had registered under the name Lente but changed his surname to Lorraine's, Vivi. This reminded Shella of the missing protagonist. After receiving his iron-level adventurer's proof, the protagonist once again ventured into the Watermoon Labyrinth. He was drawn by the sound of a fight ahead and found two novice adventurers battling goblins. Judging that they could handle themselves at this level, he turned to leave. Previously, he would have approached newcomers to guide them, but now, with his current appearance, he avoided contact unless someone was in dire need of help. His goal in visiting the Watermoon Labyrinth was to explore an unknown area beyond the Bone Giant's room and report it to the guild for a significant contribution. Upon stepping through the teleportation circle, he didn't encounter the strong enemy he expected but was transported to a dusty room. Lifting the curtain, he found only a skeleton on the bed.
そこで何をしているのですか？もう一度聞きますね。あなたはそこで。
まずい。こいつはやばいやつだ。
The woman's aura was as formidable as the dragon the protagonist had encountered initially. Hearing the protagonist mention looking for items, the woman immediately branded him a thief, stating that thieves should be prepared to die at any moment. She couldn't forgive the disturbance of her space. Without allowing the protagonist to explain, she launched an attack. The protagonist was sent flying but didn't die. Instead, his clothes were burned off. The mysterious woman was about to deliver a finishing blow when she saw his monstrous body and ceased her attack. Guessing why he could come here without explaining further, she admitted her mistake and apologized. Continuing to talk as if nothing had happened, she mentioned burning his clothes and offered her cloak as compensation, asking him to keep this place a secret. In return for his silence, she handed him a map, a magical device that automatically records the explored areas of the labyrinth for its holder. Believing their transaction complete, she teleported the protagonist to the labyrinth's exit. 2.5 minutes later, the protagonist returned to the cottage. Lorraine couldn't help but tease that perhaps he was cursed, always encountering bizarre situations. They then examined the magical device given by the mysterious woman. Lorraine confirmed it wasn't cursed, but it didn't react to her magic. However, when the protagonist infused it with his magic, the device displayed a detailed map of the Watermoon Labyrinth, including moving icons with names, likely the two novice adventurers he had encountered earlier. Lorraine was astounded, declaring the map's capabilities as national treasure level. They continued to experiment with the map, discovering its extensive features and confirming its value. Besides the magical device, the protagonist asked Lorraine to examine the cloak given by the mysterious woman. A brief inspection revealed it to be of high quality, with excellent magical resistance and imperviousness to ordinary blades, offering more protection than standard armor. As for the mysterious woman, they had little information, only knowing her strength exceeded that of a gold-level adventurer. The next day, the protagonist returned to the Watermoon Labyrinth. Since encountering the dragon there, his fate had changed dramatically. Swallowed whole and transformed into a monster, he considered this part of the adventure he longed for as a mithril-level adventurer. He planned to find the woman again, hoping she might know why he became a monster. However, upon reaching the entrance, the teleportation circle had already disappeared.